real attempts to prepare for, at a base, a change in the North Korean regime, and then moving up the scale, some type of reunification, whatever that may be. And we've known about this for years. The fact that there's at least as far as I know, and maybe no different, no real planning for that as to how you would approach something that would make the German reunification, look like a Sunday's work compared to what you would have to do with North Korea and the size of the population and far more rudimentary conditions under which they live, as well as how people torn out of a totalitarian world for generations would suddenly operate in the real world as we live in. And maybe there is more planning going on. I certainly haven't heard about it, and it seems that that's the one thing everybody wants to not think about, which sort of feeds into those ideas of, well, the status quo isn't all that bad, right? If you're Korea, if you're China, you use the red herring of, we don't want 500,000 or 1 million North Koreans rushing over our borders. I don't know, China controls 1 billion Chinese. I'm not so sure that it's tough for them to control 1 million North Koreans. Not saying it would be, pretty, but I think that's a red herring. If you're the U.S., you're largely silent on the issue. And the question is, who does the status quo serve? It obviously doesn't serve the people of North Korea. So how that you then layer that into all of these other discussions that you have on what is an effective U.S.-Japan Korea or Korea-U.S., Korea-Japan set of relations means that there's going to be, I hope we're just not taken by surprise, and that there has been no intellectual groundwork laid, and precisely to deal with some of the other issues you bring up, the questions of the nationalistic feelings on both sides, and they're not just in Korea, they're in Japan as well, and how you move to a new generation of education and outreach and exchange, which is what I hope would happen. Which I'm not sure is being as pursued as aggressively as it could be.
Other questions? Yes. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Jeff Jones with the Department of Agriculture. Wondered if you'd comment on the recently announced Korea, Japan, China FTA exploratory talks. Is this a reaction to the U.S. Maybe perceived lack of real interest to pursue those similar relationships with Korea and Japan? What is the likelihood of those to succeed? And what would happen if they do succeed? What might happen to the U.S. This new trilateral relationship that you've discussed this morning?
Well, a good question. I think it's one that has come up even before you saw what I would argue, is a lack of trade policy in the Obama administration, or certainly a lack of real political will to try and push through. You have chorus still languishing in the Congress. Everyone seems to now be saying, well, later this year, maybe after the elections. But we've heard that before. I certainly hope so, and I think that chorus should have been ratified years ago. I think, interestingly, when you heard Japan and Korea a number of years ago, I forget exactly when, but it was maybe 5 years ago or so, talk very, very hesitantly. Just float the balloon about, should we talk about an FTA? Immediately China jumped in and said, well, no, if you're going to do that, it should be a trilateral FTA. So I think that exploratory talks are fine. I don't really expect them to go very far. I don't think there's a high likelihood that they'll agree on anything. The ag issues will always, the agricultural issues will always be for Japan the most difficult at any point in time, and it's not easy for Korea or China as well. And without, the broader question of, are we going to go back to a world global trade or global trade initiative and free trade regime, Doha and the like, or are we going to start splitting up into smaller, bilateral, trilateral, minilateral agreements and blocks, is one that I think we really should be paying far more attention to. At one level, I think keeping the free trade initiative going is good, even if it's at a minilateral level. But you ultimately have to get it back up to the global to the global level, and you're going to have significant concessions by the developed and major developing states to agree on market access and the like. I don't see any push for that right now. And in fact, when the DPJ, the Democratic Party of Japan, was running last year, they argued that they would be different from the LDP and they would fully engage Japan in free trade talks and agreements around the world. And then you went down to the fine print and it said, except where it would impact traditional communities' lifestyle and ability to support themselves, i.e. farmers. And so the out was right there. And in fact, they've pursued fairly little. And Japan overall has pursued fairly few, comparatively, fairly few free trade agreements. It has some, and they're not all that significant. So again, I think it's just more broader aspirational attempts to say, we still have a role to play in this on the part of all parties. But that trilateral, I think, is something that we should be watching, but I wouldn't expect much personally out of it.
There's a question right in front of Jeff, I believe. Damien?
Thank you very much. Damien Tompkins, East-West Centre. I'm just wondering, you alluded to this in the answer to the last question, but where do you see the DPJ, Hatayama, going with Japan over the short term, comparing to Koizumi, over the next couple of years, relation of the alliance? I know it's something that a lot of people have talked about, but my basic question is, what do you expect of Japanese politics for the immediate future, and what influence is that going to have within the region?
Well, I think we all hoped that last August, meaning the election that brought the DPJ to power, would settle Japanese politics, so to speak. That you would finally have gotten, the long, slow, torturous death of the LDP would be over. You'd have a new government with massive public support, hope and change in Japan, which is very much how the DPJ ran. And that Japan, the ship of state would be righted and would be set on a new course and would sail forward. Clearly, that's not happened, and the track record of the DPJ over the past year, not just on the U.S. relations with Futenma, which is significant and something I'm happy to talk about, but even domestically, really the stalling of their domestic agenda, as well as the realization that what they promised in the campaign, a lot of which was really unrealizable, set them back significantly in public opinion and public support. That you've actually entered what I think it's going to be a more fluid and unstable period in Japanese politics. You had the paralysis of the last years of the LDP, in which they couldn't get anything done, support was hemorrhaging and the like. Now you've got the LDP basically breaking apart, not entirely, but it's a rump party of what it was before. And you have a lot of these other small, now independent one or two man parties. Basically, they're very they're mini cults of personality. They're always centered around one person. It's not a party with a platform or a set of interests. It's one person. What I think you're going to see is a lot more fusion and fission among those parties, coming together and breaking up, and coming together and breaking up, until you get some type of equilibrium that we thought we'd reach with the DPJ. Don't forget, it took the DPJ 15 years. It wasn't the DPJ back then, but it took 15 years ultimately for these opposition parties to coalesce into what became the DPJ and win power. If the DPJ does poorly in the July elections, as now, and it's funny, 6 months ago everyone said, get those July elections over, man, DPJ controls the upper house, has a lock on politics, everything will go smoothly. Now people are hoping it doesn't lose too many seats, because what will that do to the party itself? Will you see defections from the DPJ potentially? You have the two top leaders of the party in both political trouble and legal trouble. You've got circling wolves at both the senior levels of the party and all of those down at the lower levels who were locked out of any of the real goods that they thought they'd be getting when the party came into power. The DPJ will not, I think, survive as it is today in its current form for forever, obviously, for much longer. Once you get to power, no one wants to jump off the ship, but you start losing seats in this first election, and then you're more dependent, on your coalition partners. It just means you can do less. So I think we're actually heading into more instability. Hatoyama